Hey everyone, do you want to deal massive damage while having a single digit of HP? If you do, you've come to the right video. Danjin is a 4-star main DPS using the Havoc element, and even though she's a 4-star, she has the potential to outdamage even the best 5-star main DPSs if you play her really well. The only problem is, you gotta figure out how. And luckily for you, I'm here to explain exactly that.
Eradicate.
Danjin's kit revolves around two things: her Forte circuit and her health draining mechanic. Each time you use a resonance skill, Danjin sacrifices 3% HP and stores it in her Forte circuit. Once you've reached 50% in your circuit bar, you can use your charge attack to deal a nice amount of damage while healing the same amount of HP back. But if you fill the entire Forte bar, you can do massive amounts of damage while only healing 50% of her Forte circuit bar. Now that we know how the main part of her kit works, let's find out how to use her entire kit. You have 3 different resonance skills. Her first skill is a simple upswing, which deals a bit of damage and doesn't apply any special effects. However, you can use this as a replacement for your first attack. Next up, you have her skill 2, which you can activate after using 2 basic attacks. And just like the amount of basic attacks, this skill can be cast twice. After the second attack hits, it will apply a mark on the enemies for 12 seconds, which will increase the damage dealt to the target by Danjin by 20%. And finally, you have her main combo. 3 basic attacks into 3 resonance skills. This fills the bar the most and deals the most damage. Besides just clicking her resonance skill, you can also fill the bar by using your resonance skill after your dodge counter. This is even encouraged by the game, since you can unlock an inherent skill that makes it so when you use a dodge counter, it deals 20% more damage. Plus, you lose twice the amount of HP and gain double the amount of Forte stacks. Once you've filled the Forte bar either halfway or full, you can use a charge attack to deal massive damage after that. Instantly use a basic attack to deal the final attack, dealing massive damage again. This both counts as heavy attack damage. I do recommend to fill the bar all the way, since you can deal 2.4 times the amount of damage compared to a halfway fill. And lastly, we have our ultimate attack. Besides looking cool and dealing a lot of damage, it doesn't do anything special. As for her leveling priorities, I recommend leveling up her Forte circuit first, since that's where most of her damage comes from. After that, I recommend the resonance skill. This is also a nice chunk of damage and you're gonna be using it a lot. And finally, I would level her resonance liberation. You can pretty much use this every rotation since it has a low energy requirement. So it's a nice damage bonus at the end of a rotation. And of course, if you want to do some overworld stuff, you can level your normal attacks and your intro skill if you have the resources to spare.
Upswing. Harmonize.
Danjin can use an array of weapons, but there are a couple that really shine. As a baseline, we will use the Emerald of Genesis, since it's a standard 5-star weapon. Lots of people probably have this weapon, since we got quite a few standard banner pools for the weapon selection banner, and we were able to choose one 5-star weapon of choice. With its substat giving 24.3% crit rate and a base attack of 587, it's a universally good weapon. And when you add its passive, which gives increased energy regen by 12.8% and increased attack by 12%, it is obviously one of the strongest weapons on Danjin. We will baseline this weapon as 100% strength. Next up is the Blazing Brilliance. With a nice 48.6% crit damage and a base attack of 587, this weapon will also be really good for Danjin. But what really brings it home is the increased resonance skill damage bonus. Besides giving 12% attack in its passive, it also gives an up to 56% increased resonance skill bonus. And since we just went over a kit, you know how valuable this is. Sadly, this is a limited weapon, so you'll have to wait for the Rerun of Changli to obtain this weapon if you haven't already. Compared to the Emerald of Genesis, this weapon is about 110% as strong as that one. As the third option for Danjin is the Commando of Conviction. Since this weapon and the next weapon are both 4-star options, the attack on them is gonna be lower than the prior weapons, so keep that in mind. But all in all, either of these weapons are still gonna be a good option. With a base attack of 412, it is quite a bit lower than the previous mentioned weapons, and on top of that, its subset is 39.3% attack, so you will have to get a couple more crit rolls to be even on the crit compared to the other weapons. And since its passive of this weapon is giving 15% up to 30% attack at R5 after using an intro skill, it is definitely not as strong as the prior weapons. But after calculating, this weapon is about 92.7% as strong as the Emerald of Genesis, if this weapon is at R5. And the final weapon we have is our Battle Pass weapon. the Looming Gloss. With a base attack of 387, it is the lowest of all weapons recommended on the list, and the substat doesn't help much, being 36.4% attack. But luckily, the passive of Looming Gloss saves the day. My resonance skill is used, increased basic attack and heavy attack damage by 20% up to 64% at R5. As you can see, at R5 this weapon passive is no joke. With all this in mind, the Looming Gloss at R5 will be about 90.9% as strong as the Emerald of Genesis. As for her Echo set, there's only one that really shines, and that's the Sun Sinking Eclipse set. Its 2-piece effect gives a flat 10% havoc damage. Nothing special, but its real strength is in its 5-piece effect. This effect grants 7.5% havoc damage bonus after using a basic attack or heavy attack, stacking up to 4 times for a maximum of 30%. This fits her playstyle perfectly, since she has to basic attack a couple of times in a rotation before dealing her big damage attack.
Fury boils. As you wish.
Danjin has one good team she can use as a main DPS, so let's dive into the first team. We use Danjin as our main DPS, obviously, and second we have Mortify. Besides dealing a nice amount of damage, Mortify's auto skill increases heavy attack damage, and with Constellations, while using Resonance Liberation, he can buff Danjin's damage even more. And if you have the standard 5-star pistols, you can use them on Mortify as well, which increase the incoming Resonator's attack by 10%. And lastly, we have either Farina or Baiji. Even though Danjin doesn't necessarily need a healer, it is smart to put one on your team, since ultimately you are going to be on a maximum of 50% HP at all times. Now which healer you should use is all up to you. I would say, if you can use Farina, I would pick Farina. But in the end, it's all up to preference and availability, since you can only use a character a certain amount of times in the Tower of Adversity. For our second team, we will not be using her as a single main DPS. In this team, we will use Danjin as a duo DPS with Jinji. Jinji needs time to build up her forte, so when Danjin does a rotation, Jinji can do hers right after. I've played with this a bit, and I've gotta say, it is really enjoyable. As a third unit, you can run either Mortify or a healer, depending on your needs.
Eradicate.
I personally love her playstyle. Needing to counterattack and living on the edge is just really appealing to me. Even though she has the highest damage capacity of at least all the 4-star characters, a lot of her damage is hiding behind the resonance chains. Some of the valuable ones being S1, when Danjin attacks an enemy with a mark, her attack will increase by 5%, stacking up to 6 times. But when she takes damage, she loses a stack. This increases your damage by about 15%. Another strong one is S5. Danjin's havoc damage bonus is increased by 15%. And further increased by another 15% if her HP is lower than 60%. Luckily, this is a 4-star, and since she has been on a couple banners now, it is highly likely that you got a couple of resonance chains from her. But that is all for me. Let me know what you think of Danjin. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, so I know that I should make more Wuthering Waves videos. Till next video, bye.